On the 7th of May, 1937, you could board a ship the length of 3 football fields. A ship that flew and crossed the Atlantic Ocean in 2.5 days. You would dine on fresh trout off bone china. You would sleep in a private cabin with hot and cold running water. You would stand at a sloping wall of windows and watch the ocean slide beneath your feet 1,000 feet down. This was the future of human travel, and everyone knew it. The airship was going to make the airplane look like a toy. On the 6th of May, 1937, it took 34 seconds to delete that future off the face of the earth forever. This is the long fall of the airship. To understand what was lost, you have to understand that for roughly 40 years, the airship was not the underdog of aviation. It was the favorite. When the 20th century began, the airplane and the airship were rival visions of how human beings would conquer the sky. And for a long stretch, the airship was winning. The airplane of 1910 was a flimsy contraption of canvas and wire that could carry one shivering man for a few miles before it tried to kill him. The airship could carry passengers across borders in comfort for hundreds of miles in a heated cabin. The man who made it real was a German count named Ferdinand von Zeppelin. He was a retired cavalry officer, near 60 years old, dismissed by polite society as a crank who sank his entire personal fortune into one fixed idea: a rigid airship. A vast skeleton of lightweight metal. Its body filled with cells of lifting gas, driven by engines, and steered like a ship. His first airship flew in the year 1900. His critics laughed. Within 2 decades, his name had become a common noun in half the languages of Europe. A great airship was not a dirigible. It was a zeppelin. To name your invention so completely that the world forgets the word that came before it, that is a kind of immortality. Or it looks like one. By the 1920 seconds, the dream had a flagship. The Germans built an airship called the Graf Zeppelin, and it did something no aircraft on Earth could do. In 1929, it flew around the entire world. Around the world, Lakehurst. New Jersey to Germany, to Tokyo across the empty Pacific, to Los Angeles, and home 21 days with paying passengers and champagne aboard. Then the Graf Zeppelin went to work, and over the next 9 years, it flew more than 1 million miles. It crossed the South Atlantic over 140 times on a regular passenger schedule to Brazil. It never killed a single passenger. By every measure that mattered in 1936, the airship was not an experiment. It was a proven, scheduled, intercontinental airline, and the airplane could not touch it. You have heard the airship was bigger than an airplane. You have not understood how much bigger. The Hindenburg was 803 feet long. The Titanic was 882. These two ships, one that sailed and one that flew, were nearly the same size. The largest airliner in the sky today would fit inside the Hindenburg's hull with room to spare several times over. This was not an aircraft as you picture an aircraft. This was an ocean liner that had left the water behind, and inside it was furnished. Like one climb the gangway stairs into the belly of the ship, and you entered a world of carpeted promenades and reading rooms. There was a dining room with a fitted gallery of windows, tables dressed in white linen, fresh cut flowers, and vases bolted gently to the sills. There was a lounge with a baby grand piano, a special piano built of lightweight aluminum and covered in yellow pigskin, so that even the music would not weigh the ship down. There was a smoking room on a ship filled with the most flammable gas in the universe. We will come back to that. Hold that detail. It is the whole story. The crossing took 2.5 days, Frankfurt to New Jersey. A steamship took 5. And the airship did not pitch and roll in the swells because it was above them. Passengers reported that a glass of water on the dining table sat perfectly still for the entire Atlantic crossing. You did not feel that you were flying. You felt that you were gliding, suspended, weightless, watching the curve of the world go by. A ticket cost a fortune, the equivalent of many thousands of dollars in today's money. The people aboard were industrialists, aristocrats, film stars, the cream of 2 continents, and the company that owned the sky had a waiting list. The future in 1936 was fully booked. Now we arrive at the buried thing, the thing the brochures did not print and the newsreels did not say. An airship floats because it is filled with a gas lighter than air, and in the 1930 seconds, the men who built these ships had a choice between 2 gases. One of them was helium. Helium does not burn. You can hold a flame to it and nothing happens. It is for this purpose perfectly safe. The other was hydrogen. Hydrogen is the lightest element in existence. It lifts more, it is cheaper, and it is one of the most violently flammable substances known to man. A single spark turns it into a fireball. The German airship fleet flew on hydrogen. They knew exactly what it was. They flew it over cities anyway. Why? Because they had no choice. And because of a grudge, helium in that era came from almost one place on Earth, the natural gas fields of the United States. America had a near-total monopoly on the only safe lifting gas in the world, and in 1927, the United States Congress had passed a law, the Helium Control Act, restricting the export of helium for reasons of national security. Germany, rebuilding its military under a new and frightening government, asked the Americans to sell. The Americans, watching that government with growing alarm, said no. So the most luxurious flying machines ever built were kept aloft over the rooftops of Europe and America by a gas that everyone aboard and everyone who built them knew could erase the ship and everyone in it in a matter of seconds. They built the smoking room with a double-sealed airlock and a single electric lighter chained to the wall, so no passenger would ever carry an open flame near the cells above. They engineered around the bomb. They did not remove it. They could not. There had been warnings. Hydrogen airships had burned before. A British airship called the R-101 had crashed and burned in France in 1930. Killing 48 people and ending the British airship program in a single night. An American helium airship, the Akron, had gone down in a storm in 1933 with the loss of 73 lives, the worst airship disaster in history at that time, and the people who lived in this world knew it. The men who ran the German fleet were not fools. They knew the ledger, but the Graf Zeppelin had crossed the ocean 140 times without a scratch, and the Hindenburg had already flown the Atlantic 17 times in a single year. When a dangerous thing keeps not killing you, you stop seeing the danger, you start to believe you have beaten it. That belief was about to walk into a thunderstorm over New Jersey. By 1936, the airship was no longer only a luxury. It was a flag. The new German government had seen what the Hindenburg was, the largest object ever to fly, silver and enormous and unmistakable, sailing over the capitals of the world. And it understood the propaganda value perfectly. They painted enormous swastikas on the tail fins. They sent the ship to fly over the Olympic Stadium in Berlin in 1936. They used it to drop leaflets and blare anthems over German cities during the elections. The most beautiful flying machine ever made had been turned into a billboard for one of the darkest regimes in human history. The men who designed it for champagne and ocean crossings now watched it become a symbol of something they could not control. And yet, as a machine, it was magnificent. Through 1936, its first full season, the Hindenburg performed flawlessly. 10 round trips across the North Atlantic, 7 down to Brazil, thousands of passengers carried in comfort no airplane could dream of, on schedule, on time, dependable as a railway. The company that ran it, the Zeppelin Company, was planning a whole fleet. Sister ships were already under construction. A regular, scheduled transatlantic airship line, Europe to North America to South America, was not a fantasy. It existed. It was selling tickets. The 1937 season was booked solid, the first crossing of the year departing Frankfurt in early May, bound for Lakehurst, New Jersey. On board would be 97 souls. And a film crew was waiting at the other end. The crossing in early May 1937 was slow. Headwinds over the Atlantic. Then, arriving over New Jersey on the afternoon of May 6th, thunderstorms. And the captain, a careful and experienced airshipman, chose to wait them out, cruising the ship up and down the coast over Manhattan, over the beaches, for hours, until the weather cleared. By early evening, the storms had passed enough to land. The Hindenburg approached the mooring mast at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in fading light. Slightly behind schedule, the air still damp and charged with electricity from the storm. On the ground, a crowd waited. Reporters, newsreel cameras, a radio announcer named Herbert Morrison recording a routine description of a routine arrival for broadcast back in Chicago. He was describing the ship as a thing of beauty. He had no idea he was about to narrate the death of an entire age of travel. At 7:25 in the evening, the mooring lines dropped from the nose to the men below. The great ship hung 200 feet over the field, nose down toward the mast, almost home. And then, near the tail, high up on the upper hull, a small flicker of flame appeared. For one instant, it was only a flicker. In the next instant, the flame found the hydrogen. The rear of the ship bloomed into a ball of fire that climbed the entire 800 feet of the hull in seconds. The tail dropped, blazing. Toward the ground, the flames raced forward through cell after cell. The whole vessel, 3 football fields of it, was a torch, sinking, burning out of the sky onto the field where the crowd stood screaming. From the first flicker to the moment the wreck hit the ground was 34 seconds. 34 seconds. At the microphone, Herbert Morrison's professional patter shattered in real time. His voice climbed into horror and then broke completely. Oh, the humanity, he sobbed into the recorder and all the passengers and could not go on. That recording, a grown man weeping on the air as a machine and the people inside it burned in front of him, would be played and replayed for the next 90 years. And the cameras caught all of it. The bloom of fire, the falling tail, the skeleton glowing inside the flames, the survivors staggering out of the inferno with their clothes alight. Of the 97 people aboard, 35 died, along with one man on the ground. By any measure, by the brutal arithmetic of disasters, far more lived than died. The Titanic killed 1,500. The R-101 killed 48. The Akron killed 73. More people walked away from the Hindenburg than from almost any comparable catastrophe of the age. And it did not matter, not even slightly, because this one was on film. Here's the part that should be impossible. The Airship had a better safety record than the early airplane. The Graf Zeppelin had flown 1,000,000 miles and killed no one. Even after Lakehurst, 2 out of 3 people aboard the Hindenburg survived. By any rational ledger, the Airship was not finished. But the world does not run on ledgers. It runs on images. And for the first time in human history, a catastrophe of this scale had been captured on motion picture film with sound and could be carried into every theater on Earth within days. Within 48 hours, audiences from New York to Berlin to Tokyo sat in darkened cinemas and watched the newsreel. They watched the largest flying object ever built turn into a falling wall of fire. They heard the announcer break down and weep. You could read 1,000 words about the Airship's safety record. You could be told correctly that more people died on the roads every single day. None of it survived contact with 34 seconds of that film. The image went into the collective mind of the human race, and it never came out. The word Hindenburg stopped meaning a ship and started meaning a way to die. No amount of engineering could compete with that. You cannot argue a person out of a thing they have watched burn. The reaction was instant and total. Passenger bookings on the surviving Graf Zeppelin, which had never harmed anyone, evaporated overnight. The German company grounded its remaining ship within months. The half-built sister ship, the Graf Zeppelin II, would fly a handful of test and military flights and never carry a single fare-paying passenger across an ocean. The transatlantic airship line, booked solid weeks earlier, the proven future of intercontinental travel, simply ceased to exist. Not phased out, not outcompeted over years, the way Sears or Pan Am or Kodak slowly bled. Deleted in one news cycle. An entire mode of human travel, 40 years in the building, was over inside a single season, and the public verdict was so absolute that no one ever seriously challenged it again. You can tell the story of the Airship as a story about hydrogen, about a regime that turned a marvel into a banner, about a film crew that happened to be rolling at the worst second in aviation history. You can tell it as a story about America refusing to sell a safe gas to a frightening enemy, and so leaving its rival to fly on a bomb. All of those are true, but underneath them is something colder. The Airship died at exactly the moment the airplane stopped being a toy. In the same years that the Hindenburg burned, the airplane was quietly becoming everything the Airship was not. In 1935, 2 years before Lakehurst, an American company flew a new airliner called the DC-3, metal reliable, fast, able to carry passengers profitably across a continent. It was small. It was cramped. It had no piano and no promenade, but it was 3 times faster than an airship. It did not need a half-mile of ground crew and a mooring mast. It did not depend on a scarce gas, and it could not climb the sky in a wall of fire. The Airship was the more beautiful machine. The airplane was the better one. The fire at Lakehurst did not start that contest. It ended it early, brutally, in front of the cameras, and handed the entire sky to the airplane in an evening. By the time the war that was coming had ended, the great hangars stood empty, the mooring masts were scrapped, and a child born in 1940 would grow up genuinely believing the Airship had been a clumsy curiosity that never really worked, when in truth it had been, for 40 years, the most luxurious way a human being had ever crossed the earth. For 40 years, the largest things that human beings had ever flown were ships of the sky, and the men who built them believed they were building the future. They were beaten not by a better idea over decades, but by 34 seconds of film and a single voice breaking on the air. The great hangars are mostly gone now. The mooring fields are mown grass with a stone marker. If that, no one has crossed an ocean in a floating palace since, and almost no one alive remembers that anyone ever did. Thank you for watching The Long Fall. If decline stories like this one interest you, the channel will be here.